this doesn't seem like the right behavior for me. So that's why I wanted to understand from your point of view, like, what do you think of religion as, or faith in God as? And I just want to quickly summarize. I'm just going to read the transcript of um, the best representations of my feelings that I came across. There's a channel called Theremin Trees. I'm sure you all know it. And I'm just going to read the transcript from his video. Is imagine that you're in the middle of nowhere. You're told that the truth is out there. You just have to search for it. And there is a bewildering number of signposts in front of you, each claiming to be the right way. And then, you pick a direction, or you have it picked for you, like I had picked for me. And then you walk for miles and there are no gods, and you meet people along the way, and who tell you that you chose the right direction. Just keep walking, just have more faith, and just work on your faith, although they can never say how far you have to go. And after many miles, the truth finally dawns on you that there are people in every single direction on each path who tell you the exact same thing. Like, there are Protestants, there are Catholics, there's Muslims, Shia, Sunnis, and Tablighi, Deobandi. And I'm not even getting into the Hindu, the gods, or like Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism. So all of them are on their path, and they think they're right. And there are a limited number of years in my life, and if I choose to walk in a futile direction, or multiple futile directions, I will never be able to investigate in any kind of depth. And what's being proposed is a game of chance, and this is an impossible game. And my atheism is the refusal to play this impossible game. And this is where Theremin Trees concludes. And I just want to add one point to that is, no, I think that's a good summary. Yeah, it's an impossible game.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm not your typical kind of theist. I am a Christian. I consider myself more of a philosophical Christian, or mere Christianity kind of thing. I grew up in a real fundamentalist Christian Protestant house as a young child, with parents who really didn't attend church. They were, I would say, cultural Christians, but had drug problems, alcohol problems, things like that. So what I had learned about God was basically in passing with what I learned from Sunday school, which happened to be young earth creationism, things of that nature. Became a teenager with, and ended up in the streets, single mom, 3 boys, little oversight. So I never really thought about God and things of that nature. I got married when I was in my 20s. And then we had my first daughter, and we thought it would be best if we went to church and had her grow up in the church. So we went back to the same church, which was the only thing I knew, which was fundamentalist. But I love science, and they made all these false dichotomies between young earth creationism and evolution, and this dogmatic assertion of every word of the scriptures. And I had so many questions and things, none of it just didn't make sense. And kind of went through my own deconstruction, became agnostic for a short bit of time, because I always had just some idea that there was something more than, life. Could have been because of my upbringing, not sure. So I went on kind of like a journey to learn about a lot of the other religions around the world, the major religions and things. And long story short, given the philosophical arguments that I stumbled across for God, I thought they were thoroughly convincing that some God exists, and very few religions made sense to me, and not that Christianity made a whole lot of sense, but given the facts around the life of Christ, who he was, and the explanatory scope of the resurrection hypothesis and things of that nature, I was convinced that Christ had something to do with whoever that God was. So just to sum it up, I hold to like a Bayesian epistemology. I think that our confidence in our beliefs should be proportionate to the evidence. So I, by no certainty, or I don't have any certainty that there is a God. I am convinced there's a God. I think it's more plausible than less plausible, given what I've learned. And I think that the resurrection hypothesis is more plausible for the explanatory scope of the facts, inference to the best explanation. But if Christianity was falsified tomorrow, I would probably still be at least a deist. I wouldn't be a Christian anymore. Because, like I said, I don't hold any certainty. So the first question that you asked, why is your position not rational? I actually wouldn't even take that position, because I think that knowledge is something that encompasses almost every aspect of who we are. It has to do with where we're raised, how we're raised, the country we live in, the cultures that we live in, our experiences in life. So I couldn't take a position that your position is irrational, because, like I said, not really holding any kind of certainty and not being certain God exists. And just to make clear, I'm not one of the Christians who have this feeling of God, or, I'm more of a practicing kind of Christian. I don't go by this personal relationship in the way that you hear a lot of fundamentalists talk about. So with that, I wouldn't say it's irrational at all. I would say atheism, agnosticism. When I say irrational, I mean more in the formal sense, irrational. I think that hard atheism, strong atheism, that there is no God, and to argue for there is no God, I think I wouldn't say irrational, but I think that's agnosticism, in my opinion, would just be a better position. But starting from there, I'd say that I wouldn't say that you are irrational to be an atheist.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. And I wanted to understand, like, because people argue about this one. Is it possible to be an agnostic atheist, according to you? Like, I just don't know whether a God exists or not, but so far as my beliefs are,
Yeah, typically I don't get into debates about what atheism means to some people, because it's there's so many people out there that hold to different ideas of what atheism is. If I was going to, point to a definition that I think is the best definition, it would be like from the position in academia, where most positions that I've read is you don't really have atheism and agnosticism compounded together. You're usually either an atheist, agnostic, apatheist, or theist. Because, and they will make the argument on that side that the proposition of a theist is God exists, and the negation of that proposition is God doesn't exist. So an atheist, so an atheist would be that God doesn't exist, and an agnostic would be one who doesn't know or doesn't think that we can, not necessarily that we can't prove there's a God, but some would hold that we can't. If there is a God, we couldn't know. Some agnostics just say, I don't know. I don't know if we can prove it. And then you got the apatheist who just doesn't care. So I don't really get caught up in the definitions of that. I would lean towards what's in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. They lay out a case for all the positions, and what someone wants to identify as far as that goes, I just work within the confines of that.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, and I'm not an etymologist myself, so I probably have to read up on these definitions. But I had a question about you mentioning that you stuck to your Christian faith. Is that correct? I mean, you found that most reasonable.
Yes.
Okay, so this is what I don't understand.
Mhm.
about people's beliefs is, have you investigated all the others? Like, have you investigated Sanatan Dharma in Hinduism, for example?
I went through the all the mainstream religions. I went through Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, uh, and some Eastern mysticism. But no, I haven't investigated all of them at all.
Correct. But what if I were to say that, okay, you have rejected them maybe because you haven't looked into it in any sort of depth? That's the common one I get from religious people, for example.
Yeah, my position would be that I don't reject it.
Okay.
I would be agnostic to the truth of it. Also, with being a philosophical Christian, I lean more towards the orthodox positions for not, I reject dogma. So I don't hold to, Catholic dogma or Orthodox dogma, but I do respect their approach to scripture, and I want to try to get as close to the time of the writings as possible to understand it the best. And real quick, what I mean by that is, so an analogy would be the Catholic Church looks at the doctrine as we would look at the Constitution in the U.S. and the organization of priests, cardinals, bishops interpret that through the eyes of the founding fathers, just like our judicial system would interpret the Constitution through the eyes of the founding fathers. And I think that's the best practice until we end up with dogmas that enter the church throughout time, which is why there was the split. So, given that, if we go back to the mere Christianity, the basic bones of Christianity, and we understand, given when it was written, who it was written to, the authors, the points they were trying to make, and all those things, I don't hold that you have to believe in Christianity for salvation. So I think God has revealed himself to everyone in whatever way in their life that he could. And I don't hold that if he's revealed himself and someone's just not convinced by it, that they're condemned either, because that doesn't make sense to me. So to me, the condemnation would be if hell exists, which I'm not 100% sold on, given the Jewish idea of Hades and Sheol. If hell did exist, annihilationism or conditional eternity makes the most sense to me. But if it did exist and people were condemned, it would be based on their knowledge that was given to them and revealed and their intentions. So with God being an all good God in, classical Christianity, in order for God to be an all good God, if someone does those things that comports to the nature of an all good God, but yet wasn't in a position to hear the gospel, I don't see any reason whatsoever an all good God would condemn that person. So get all of that to say, other religions may just be ways that the culture has understood the revelation of this God. And I don't think they're going to be condemned just because they haven't heard about Jesus or they haven't heard about Abraham and Moses and, the whole Abrahamic religions.
Okay. So the problem then happens is that when you talk about things like good and the bad, right? Like a good God wouldn't condemn, and people are trying to just know this good God through their own means or culture. Is that what is regarded as good by people could be mutually exclusive? So, for example, Muslims would say eating pork is haram, like a big sin, or drinking alcohol is a big sin, whereas a Christian may say no, like maybe an Orthodox Christian would. Hindus might disagree, and so clearly there's like multiple different standards here. So I just don't know, how do you reconcile what about this goodness is?
Yeah, so that's why I had put the qualifier for the intentions. Um, for me, cultural practices that are considered wrong are we have what's called social mores and or cultural mores. Every country has its own cultural mores. So, for example, to use a certain word in this country would be considered sinful. When I go to another country, is it sinful to use it there if it isn't? So I think we can separate true evil from cultural mores and true goodness from cultural mores, such as we all, I mean, I assume being a Muslim before that you're a moral realist, that there are moral facts in the world.
Correct.
Would you? Okay. So, given that moral realism is true, we all have an idea of what is wrong and what is right, generally speaking. We know certain things are truly wrong, like killing somebody for the fun of it. And certain things are truly good, like saving a drowning child. So I would distinguish the good and the bad from social mores or cultural practices to those things that are truly good and truly bad. Now, I'm sure, and there's definitely probably going to be some gray area there as to what is truly good and truly bad. If we spend a whole lot of time there, but that's kind of the way that I approach it.
So in that case, like there have been cultures where they have practiced human sacrifice, for example. So they clearly don't see that as bad.
They don't see that as bad. No, that right, and I would disagree that it is, and I think that intuitionally, that most people would agree that it's wrong to sacrifice. But also, you got to understand the principle's still there. Murdering is pretty much bad for any culture throughout all time. Now, they can argue over what is murder, whether to kill one of their own is wrong or not. But for them to dehumanize another people and use human sacrifice, for example, let's say, or even to use their own people to say a child must be sacrificed. Well, you would presumably have some type of priest or something like that. Well, if somebody was to take the priest and sacrifice the priest instead, they would think that that's murder and that's wrong. So the general principle's still there. It's just that
I don't quite understand. So I think like the general principle is not that a murder itself is wrong. What the general principle seems to me is whatever God says is right or wrong. So for example, Abraham, when God told him to sacrifice his son, he didn't think twice. He didn't think whether murder itself is right or wrong. He just if God says it, it's right.
yeah, that would be divine command theory, and I would reject that. I don't think that what God says necessarily is what's right or wrong. If God told me tomorrow to go sacrifice my child, I would not do it. And I don't think that that story, personally, I think that was more of typological prophecy. I don't have a reason rationally to hold to God really telling Abraham to sacrifice his child. However, there are arguments for it, such as child sacrifice was pretty common in the cultures around there, and it wasn't, that far out of the realm to ask Abraham to do that. But me personally, we're missing so much historical context. I don't know that we can say with confidence that God really told Abraham to sacrifice his child, and it wasn't just some kind of allegorical story or something.
Yeah, so I think like this is very common with Islamic apologists as well. The argument of presentism is that you're judging what happened in the past with the moral code of right now. But still, I think that's a bad argument, because if morality has changed through time, then it has been subjective, right? So for example, God at one point said that, okay, this was right, but it's not right any longer. So for example, in Islam, and I had this conversation even on one of the Dawa guys' podcast. is that, you know, sex outside of wedding is haram, for example, right now. But if you go to heaven, all you'll be doing is having sex outside marriage. So, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Like when you're earth, you're doing something, and suddenly that thing is not wrong anymore in heaven. So that doesn't sound objective to me. So similarly, when you say, but it seems like, I don't want to get into this argument because it seems that you rejected yourself.
Well, yeah, and let me just say real quick on that point before we do move on that you seem to be still assuming divine command theory because you said what God says changes over time of what's moral and what isn't. I would
Right.
argue sacrificing children's always moral throughout history and all time. I wouldn't say that it changes.
Okay. So let's switch from morality, maybe, because morality could be a discussion of itself. I wanted to know, you said that you found religion convincing, or maybe not religion, but the belief in God. You were convinced, basically, right? So I wanted to know, what was it? What was the reason that convinced you? And I want to assess that.
Yeah. So the first thing would be the idea that something other than the world that we experience exists, which is something that has been just an intuition of mine as far back as I can remember. So I can't deny the fact that you know that I have an innate feeling that something else exists. So when I evaluate these arguments, I try to evaluate, or I tried to and still do, evaluate them as objectively as possible. But I think it's impossible to take all of our prejudices and biases and set them aside, regardless of which side of the fence you're on. And so to say that, so what's convincing to me may not be convincing to you. And given that, when I got into philosophy of religion and I started reading about these different arguments, the cosmological argument, the argument from contingency, the fine tuning, all these different cosmological arguments, they seem to build an abductive case for there being something more than the physical life that we experience. And I'm still thoroughly convinced that there is something other than, you know, the physical life that we exist. And with that, I have had what I would consider religious experiences in the past, which obviously fits my worldview, my paradigm. So I don't know 100% certain that they were religious experiences, and it's nothing crazy, not like, you know, charismatics or things like that. But I have had unexplainable experiences that fit within that worldview. So they kind of build this, in my experience and my paradigm, they kind of build this solid case for there being, you know, a God or something other than the world we experience.
So there's a lot to unpack there, actually. So about personal experiences, I don't deny that people can have personal experiences. I mean, there's a lot of places in India, for example, where people have incredible experiences, and you know, but what the problem seems to be is not having a personal experience, but what you attribute that personal experience to. So, for example, because I had this personal experience, now that suddenly means that God exists. That doesn't seem to be like the right argument. Is that
Say that again. I'm sorry.
so? Just because you had a certain personal experience, that doesn't necessitate that a God must exist, because you could have been deluded, or I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way, but
Oh, absolutely. No, that's not offensive. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's why I usually don't make arguments from experience in that kind of way, or religious experience. I try to be as transparent as possible so that other people that I'm discussing this with can realize that there are innate things there through my experience that also build the case. And we can't, I mean, no matter how we slice it, you can't deny personal experience. I mean, it
Right.
may not be
Okay.
convincing to you, but to me, it seems to fit. And like I said, all we can do is try to be as objective as possible. But
Right.
at the end of the day, we still have, certain ideas and things that are, implanted there, whether how strong they are or not. I don't think anybody can be 100% truly objective when evaluating evidence.
Okay. So we address that, but let's go to the kalam and the contingency. Um, so why does that convince you of a God?
Well, like I stated earlier, it seems to be an abductive case. I
What is an
think
abductive case? I'm sorry, I'm not as
that,
well versed in philosophy.
yes, well, abductive reasoning would be um, different different evidences from different areas coming together to kind of like an investigator in a homicide investigation. They would look at they would find certain evidences here and there where the person was at the time, whether there's fingerprints there, whether they hated the person or not. They would take all of these into account to decide whether to charge a person with murder or not. That would be abductive reasoning. So with the Kalam, in my opinion, I don't like the arguments to God through the Kalam like Craig and a lot of other apologists use. I think the Kalam just gets us to a first cause. I think that the contingency, specifically the modal contingency argument, gets us to a necessary something. The fine tuning, we have the world created in such a way that we have intelligent carbon life. So when I step back and look at the picture as a whole, and we have a, necessary first cause in this reality that seems to be fine tuned for our existence, and then we take moral realism as being true, it seems to get us to a personal, necessary first cause and a reality that seems to be fine tuned for our existence.
Why do you think this first cause must be personal?
I don't.
Oh, you just mentioned that it leads to a personal,
No.
all-powerful.
That's where moral realism comes in. That's why I was saying
Oh,
it's like an abductive case.
okay.
So
So,
yeah. So the Kalam would get us just to a first cause. Or not necessarily even the Kalam. I mean, we can go with Aristotle's unmoved mover or Aquinas's pure act. There's
so,
less
so,
there. Go ahead.
sorry. So you were talking about a cumulative case, and I hear this sometimes from theists. So, in fact, I would argue that if you try to make a cumulative case, you would in fact come up with the solution that God doesn't exist. In fact, because like I told you my story, or growing up, at every turn I was deceived and brainwashed and asked not to doubt, and from the stalwarts, or basically from people who uh, claim to possess the truth. And then you see so many different interpretations of the religion and God. Like you yourself have a very unique interpretation of the Bible or Christianity. There's probably hundreds and thousands of these interpretations. So which definitely points to this is uh, this is a production of human mind, because just like anything else, they argue over different things, and first cause doesn't necessarily prove God. I mean, it just you come to a first cause. Now
No,
to
yeah,
make
I would agree. I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah, so if you talk about a cumulative case, all the cosmological arguments, or contingency arguments, they point to like a necessary thing, which is, or a first cause or whatever, but it doesn't tell anything about the nature of that first cause. And I don't think uh, some people then make a leap that this first cause must have consciousness, because they made a choice to create the universe versus not create the universe, which is unclear to me as to why you need a consciousness for that, because particles couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Under the
Yeah. Let me address a couple of things. First of all, the first thing I would say was based on the last point that you made, and that is I would like to keep the conversation to what I present, not what
Yeah.
other people would, because that's going to get us off into all kinds of tangents. I never made the leap that we have a personal cause or conscious from the Kalam.
Okay. My bad. Yeah.
No. It's all good. That's why I just wanted to make that clear, because we're going to end up, off in all kinds of tangents. If
Okay.
and I'm bad about, following tangents, so it's for my own benefit, if nothing else.
Fair enough. Fair
All
enough.
right. The other
So,
one would be
okay.
yeah, you had a couple of points there, so let me address a couple of them. I grew up kind of the same way you did. I was not allowed to question God's word. I was not allowed to question God. I was not allowed to question how it was being interpreted to me. So I was indoctrinated also, yet I'm in the position I'm in. So I'm not sure that that's any kind of defeater. Also, the various interpretations or the argument from plurality, that there's all these different religions and all these interpretations, they don't affect the claim that a God exists or doesn't exist. So even if we all had different interpretations, different religions, different ideas of God, it doesn't mean that because we all have different ones that a God doesn't exist. So I don't think that follows from that line of reasoning. Now, looking at the cumulative case, like you were talking about, saying that we have all these different religions and we have all these disagreements and things of that nature, that, on my understanding and my view, I don't, that would seem to fit if there was a God that was all knowing, and he revealed himself to fallible creatures, that lest we be all knowing like God, we're going to have fallible understandings. Oh, sorry about that. We're going to have fallible understandings of that God, and we're not going to get it right because we're not omniscient. We don't have perfect knowledge.
Okay. But I mean, he has perfect knowledge. He should know what would convince us and then reveal us in that framework of reason. So why doesn't he?
Well, so if God has all perfect knowledge and he could reveal himself to all of us in a way that we would all respond to it, that we have to parse out what God is able to do and what's feasible. So if free will and fallibility are part of the world, it may not be possible that God could create a world where fallible free creatures would always understand or follow what's been revealed by God.
Okay. So you think God is omniscient? Is that your position?
I think it would be necessary that God be omniscient.
Okay. So I don't think that free will is compatible with omniscience, is because if God knows a certain action, and I know this could be another tangent, but I couldn't have done otherwise if you already know all the facts that are going to happen, right? So, for example, if I set an alarm for 9 a.m. in the morning, and I could either wake up or not wake up, but if God already knows, then my destiny is pretty much determined from that point. No matter how hard I try to wake up, I wouldn't wake up.
Right. So that's where, well, first of all, I would say that God knowing doesn't necessitate you having to do it. I would say that would fall into, the creation of the world that we live in. It would be an ontological status of the world that we live in. So, for example, if I was to give my kid chocolate cake and tell my kid, in 2 minutes you can eat that chocolate cake, and in 2 minutes he eats that chocolate cake, I knew the kid was going to do it. Does that mean I made the kid do it?
No. So that's an example where you have fallibilistic knowledge of whether the kid would do it. That means you have like a 99.999% certainty that the kid would do it, but maybe some thief breaks into your house and steals your kid and runs away.
Yeah, it's well, I would.
So you don't really know.
Yeah,
I mean, you know fallibilistically, but God knows it infallibly. That's the point.
right. So, I totally get that. I was, trying to make an analogy as to how we could know things. And I guess we would have to get into, or would not get into that tangent of how we know things. But
Okay.
my point was, because I know something's going to happen, it doesn't necessitate it happening.
Correct. And I wanna stress the point that because you know something will happen infallibly doesn't mean that it won't happen. But if you know something, knowing something fallibly means that means that you still could happen otherwise. So you see that the term knowing is overloaded here. You're using term knowing in one context and you're applying that to God, which is not the case. We know fallibly, but God knows infallibly.
Right. So, well, I guess my point was to just show that knowing something, doesn't necessitate it happening. But I guess the analogy would break down if we're talking about a perfect knower. So, my position on that would be: are you familiar with Molinism?
No.
Okay. With Molinism, God has what's called middle knowledge, and he knew what he has a knowledge of counterfactuals. He knew what free creatures would do in any given situation that he put them in. So he created the world in such a way that the divine plan would unfold given the choices of free creatures in any situation that they would be put in.
Free creatures. Okay.
For example, if, let's say, God knew that if he created Pontius Pilate and put him in the situation he was in, he would freely choose to kill Jesus. It doesn't mean that God made him kill Jesus, but he put him in the actual world that we exist, in a place where he would freely choose to kill Jesus. So there is a possible world where Pontius Pilate doesn't kill Jesus, or there's a possible world where you had something different happen in your life. So God's the one who creates the actual world that we live in out of a range of feasible possible worlds
where we could freely choose, but he would still know.
Yes.
So let's say in this world of yours that you just described, I'm watching a game, let's say Chelsea versus Man United, soccer, and God knows that Chelsea is going to win 1-0, right? And I'm sitting there watching there at 0-0. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So could any of the Chelsea players do anything to change that? And God be like, oh, you tricked me. It's not 1-0, but it's 2-0. My bad.
No.
So that means that nothing could be done.
In this,
so where's the freedom? Where's the freedom there?
Right, because God worked within the confines of what people would freely do to actualize this world in any given situation. So it doesn't. So what I'm getting down to is there are a range of possible worlds God could have created. So in a sense, he is responsible that he actualized this world, but he actualized this world based on what each creature would do in any given situation, or freely do in any given situation. Okay. So it doesn't, Molinism is a philosophical position to preserve the sovereignty of God and the free will of creatures. So Calvinists would disagree and say they would hold to a divine determinism, or most an exhaustive divine determinism. And then Armenians would hold to God's foreknowledge, that he looked out into the future and saw what each creature would do, and then he created this group called the church or the elect, and we can be part of that or not part of that. But I think this is getting into more of theological positions than it
Okay.
is the general question about God. So I
Okay.
don't know if you want to, we can continue. The reason being is Molinism is a very, very hard concept to grasp, especially if you've never heard it. And it's something that I could spend a whole lot of time on trying to get, you know, somebody to understand it. So for the
I think
sake,
that's fair. Yeah.
so for the sake of it, I would even grant that, let's say, just for argumentation, that we don't have the ability to choose God or this, that, or the other. Does that affect whether the existence of God is real or not?
Okay. So again, like I keep coming back to. By the way, I'll read more about Molinism, right? Um, that's on me. But I think like we're still at an impasse. I fail to see
You
how
can't know
that
something
still
until you know it. So
was that.
I said you can't know something until you know it. So
Correct. Yeah. But I guess like we'll just like move on from there. So it seems to me that um, the evidence for God is sort of like, even if you say cumulative, I'm failing to see it. And so the first cause combined with freedom, right? No, sorry. What was your other point?
yeah, it was the a net the first cause, necessary cause or necessary being, the fine tuning, and then more
Oh,
realism.
fine tuning. We didn't address the fine tuning. So why do you think the universe is fine tuned?
Well, I mean, well, the term can be tossed around, because like Sean Carroll doesn't like the word fine tuning, but there are cosmological constants that are so fine tuned. They're so, you can't have, they can't be out too far left or right, and we wouldn't have a carbon based life. Now, it doesn't follow there wouldn't be some other kind of life, and it doesn't follow, that because everything is the way that it is, so finely tuned, that there is a God. It just, along with the first cause, the necessary something, the necessary being, given that the cosmological constants are the way that they are, and we couldn't have carbon-based life, as far as we know, without the way that these extremely narrow ranges for the cosmological constants to be in. It just seems that as if reality as we know it, the physical universe, was created in a way so that we would exist as we do.
So just to steelman your position, what you're saying is there are these constants, and they had to be the exact same way for there to be carbon-based life. And even if, like, let's say one of these things were here and there, then we wouldn't have seen that. Is that right?
Yes, we wouldn't have seen carbon-based life, but it's really, to say cosmological constants. I mean, there is a range there, but it's such a small, minute range that any change. So I don't want you to get the impression that the cosmological constants are an exact number that
No,
can't.
no, no, no.
Right.
That's not my content. I'm not going to contend that point anyway. So let's say there is a certain range, and which is very narrow, and um, so why do you think there needs to be a God to do this? Why couldn't this be a coincidence?
Well, a coincidence with what would be the causal power? Coincidence doesn't have causal power.
I mean, what if these parameters just happen to be how nature is?
Well, that would seem it would seem to beg the question. If
Uh,
they just are the way they are, because it's kind of like the anthropic principle, we're here and we see it, so that's why they are the way that they are.
okay, so in that case, so if it's circular, then even God is circular because God is who is God fine-tuned?
Well, that would be an abuse of the term fine tuning. I wouldn't apply fine tuning to God. No.
Okay, so you said that let's say one of these parameters has such a narrow range that they couldn't have been here or there a little bit, or maybe they could have. So let's say, could God know 50% of the things in this universe?
I
Only
don't.
50%?
I'm not sure how that follows from the fine tuning.
Oh, what I'm saying is like because God is a certain way as well, finely tuned to know 100% of everything.
Well,
Similarly,
yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to move anywhere if you keep using fine tune for God, because fine tuning implies a tuner. It's the
so
that's
everything has a tuner except for God.
Well, I wouldn't say that either. That's a massive
Okay, so let me understand. So universe has a tuner, but God doesn't have a tuner.
correct.
So God just was
No,
as a
God.
fine
Yeah,
tuner.
right. No, that would be God would be the necessary being given the contingency argument.
But that doesn't say anything. The contingency argument doesn't say anything about God being a fine tuner. First of all, it doesn't even say anything about God. And secondly, if you were trying to make a cumulative case, then we haven't even established yet that it's God, because there could be always other natural stuff, like unknown natural, the
Yeah,
fundamental reality.
right. So I told that's why I told you it was an abductive case, and you seem to be pulling it one piece of evidence, and another piece of evidence, and another piece of evidence, and trying to explain each piece of evidence on its own, um, to destroy the abductive case. So the kalam is just to get you to a first cause of our physical reality. The contingency gets you to a necessary being. So we have a
Okay.
first cause and a necessary being. And then the fine tuning gets us to the physical universe as it is, for carbon based life as it is. So we have a necessary first cause that fine tuned the universe for carbon life. We can go deeper into those arguments if you want to establish certain principles about that necessary first cause and fine tuner.
Okay.
I wanted to just jump in here because Mosster, you're making a really good point, but I don't think you were explaining it in the best way you could. So I think you should go back and essentially just ask why. Why does the universe need to be fine-tuned, but God can't?
But that's what he's saying, that it doesn't apply to God.
Yeah. So you ask why. Why does it not apply to God?
Mm.
What's the difference?
I see.
Excellent point, T Jump.
Sorry. Oh, by the way, I just want to say that I might have to go within 5 minutes, so maybe we should wrap up.
Okay.
I hate to. I'm enjoying this conversation, but
Hey, word, man, I'm on Discord all the time. We can do this anytime you want. So why does God not need to be fine tuned? My answer to that would be that fine tuning is a specific term that we use to talk about the physical universe, to give why the parameters are so small that they are. So in order for God to be fine tuned, then God would have to be fine tuned by something else, which would make him not be the necessary being, which would just push the goalpost back and say, okay, well, what is the necessary being?
okay. Yeah, I'll think about it a little bit. It just seems like if we talk about this universe, then yeah, sure. I mean, there are some parameters which happen to be a certain way, but
Well,
of
what
course
other
there
universe
is.
is there?
Sorry.
What other universe is there?
Oh, so maybe there is some unknown natural that we don't know about. I mean,
Yeah,
um,
we don't have any evidence for that, do we?
we don't have evidence for God either. So at this point, you're just asserting, right,
Yeah,
that there.
yeah, I was laying out the abductive case, which is evidence for God. I mean, you may not accept it, but there is evidence for God.
Um,
I mean, we have zero evidence for a multiverse. That's just a hypothesis in theoretical physics to how we
Oh,
get fine tuning or how we get to a first cause. It's an attempt at a natural explanation for the reality or physical universe that we experience.
yeah. All I'm saying is like our understanding of the beginning of the universe breaks down with the Big Bang. So we actually don't know. If you're making an empirical case about this universe, then we
It's not
actually don't.
a
Sorry.
case. It's a metaphysical case, not empirical.
Correct. So you cannot use you cannot use the empirical evidence to make a metaphysical claim, right? That would be a category error.
No, but why am I, what necessitates me using an empirical case to say there was a first cause?
And that would be an empirical cause because you're using empirical evidence to make a claim about a
So
cause.
so the unmoved mover is Aristotle's unmoved mover is an empirical claim.
No, what I'm saying is if you're making a metaphysical case, then you have to provide like metaphysical evidence. You cannot, what you can't do is use empirical evidence to make a metaphysical claim. So for example, if I said that, hey, I saw unicorns, okay, so that means unicorns exist scientifically. That would be rejected is because I'm making an abstract case, like I'm using my imaginative evidence to make an empirical claim that a
Right.
unicorn exists. Yeah.
But I think you're misunderstanding the kalam. It's not an empirical case.
Oh no, in this case, I was talking about the fine tuning. Is you're saying that this universe, so far as we know,
So you're saying we can't infer metaphysical things from empirical data?
we can't use evidence to make a claim. So if you're saying if you're talking about the natural world, or if you're talking about something which is empirical, right? You're using all this empirical data that scientists have found, let's say, and then you're postulating a conclusion which is metaphysical, is what I think is a category error.
Why would that be a category error?
Is because empirical data only is based on our senses, that what we can sense, right? So you cannot extrapolate that into making an assumption about something metaphysical, because metaphysical could be something totally different than what we observe through our empirical data.
Yeah. So okay. So what do you mean by empirical then? Because
Oh,
I'm not
by
tracking.
empirical, I mean like sense data. So
Okay. So how can you make a metaphysical claim if you don't exist?
I don't know. You will have to. Oh, if I don't exist,
Yeah.
I can't.
Well, how do you know you exist?
Because I can think, I can experience.
Right. All right. So in order to make metaphysical claims, then someone would first need to exist before they can make the claim.
About metaphysical claims, yes.
Okay. And we know that we exist because of sense data, right?
Correct.
All right. So if we exist, we know that through sense data, we know that empirically, we are making claims.
No. We don't know that empirically.
But you
We
said
know that.
earlier that empirically meant sense data.
Oh no, just the first, just that I exist. Nothing. I'm making no claim about anything. I'm just making a claim about myself, that I exist because I can experience. So that's would be an abstract claim.
Well, so Mosster, what he's saying is that your argument was that you can't use empirical claims to make metaphysical or empirical evidence to make metaphysical claims.
Correct.
But you are using the empirical evidence of your experience to justify the metaphysical claim that you exist.
No, that's not what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm not making a metaphysical claim about myself. I am just saying that I exist. I'm not making any claims about what I am or who I am metaphysically.
Well, so metaphysics, ontology, what exists is a category of metaphysics. So if you say you exist, that would be a metaphysical claim.
Okay.
Thank you,
I
T.
see.
John. That's
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay.
my point was to show that when you said that you can't make, we can't extrapolate empirical data for metaphysical claims. I mean, that's the only way when we get down to the base of it. We have to exist first, which is a metaphysical assumption, in order to even look at, empirical things. So it's kind of self-defeating is what the claim is, the problem with the claim.
No, I see your point. I see your point. Yes. Okay. So your position is that you can use empirical evidence to make a metaphysical claim. You
Yes.
can do that. Okay. Okay. Let me concede that point then. So, and I'll think about this as well in case if I get a better argument. But
so what we were talking about was the kalam and or fine tuning and empirical versus metaphysical.
I just wanted to check in, Mosster. Do you have to go? Because you said you might
yeah,
have to go.
I gotta go actually, but I would love to continue some other time. Maybe
Absolutely.
you can schedule some time. But this was exciting. It's my first time actually.
Yeah. Hey, man. That's well. I mean, we all have to start somewhere, and I'll tell you now, I don't know everything there is to know. I've been in philosophy of religion for about 10 years, and really only talking and arguing in the formal sense for a few years. So, I mean, it's you got to start somewhere.
All right. Well, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Eddie.
No
Appreciate
problem.
you coming on.
Yeah, definitely, man. I appreciate you asking me to. That was fun. It helps me work on some more of my things. Everybody thinks differently and, presents different issues. So,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my goal is to try and build a kind of like a curriculum, a debate curriculum, philosophy curriculum, so I can get some people in my community interested in doing these more often and coming on my Discord. So I really appreciate you coming on. Hope to have you back soon.
Anytime, let me know.
Yep. See you later.
All right, bye.